The Scientific Revolution, a series of breakthroughs in man's understanding and interpretations of heaven and earth. It took place in the 17th century, starting with Nicholas Copernicus, then ending with Isaac Newton. Cosmology is the theory of the order of the universe, while epistemology is the theory of knowledge. The old view of the cosmos during the medieval and early modern time was based off the works of great minds such as Aristotle, Ptolemy, and with overlay of Christian perceptions. People believed that the heavenly spheres revolved around the immobile earth. Each spheres were attached heavenly bodies that moved with them. The map of the world in the olden times were shown with Jerusalem as the center of the world, since it was the most holiest city. In the medieval period, people believed that there were 10 spheres. The higher it is, the more perfect it is, with the last sphere as the home of God. Therefore, cosmology was a hierarchy, a universe in which the heavens were purer than the earth. Human beings were nevertheless at the center of the universe, having a special relation to God. Nicholas Copernicus issued the first substantive challenge to the cosmology, which by the 15th century had grown very complex. He suggested that the Ptolemaic model was wrong in the book of the revolutions of the heavenly bodies. He substituted that cosmos that was heliocentric for one that had been geocentric. Copernicus proposed that it was simpler to hypothesize that the Earth rotated on its axis, as did the other planets, and that the Sun was the stationary body around which the entire universe moved. His system was a hypothesis, a new model of interpretation. It did not provide quantities of evidence from observation in support of its claims. His work became controversial. Tyler Brahe, an astronomer who made new observations, assembled data that suggests that all planets except the Earth circled the Sun, and the whole system could be understood to be circling the Earth. Johannes Kepler, Tyler Brahe's assistant, is in search of mathematical regularities in the universe. He put forth 3 planetary motion laws. Number 1. The movement of the planets is a regular elliptical orbit, with the Sun as a focus. Number 2. The planets move in a velocity in which equal areas are swept out in equal times. And number 3. The square of the period of the orbit of a planet is proportional to the cube of that planet's mean distance from the Sun. These laws proclaim that all the heavens were bound in a single mathematical relationship. To Kepler, the universe was a lawful mechanical system, expressed in mathematics. The model put forth by Copernicus now acquired greater status.
Cosmology was the theory of the order of the universe. There were different views on this theory. During the Middle Ages, cosmology was seen as a hierarchy where the heavens were more pure than the earth. It was believed there were 10 spheres that were each higher than the previous one. These spheres moved in a circular motion, which was the idea that the planets revolved circularly around the Sun. This view of cosmology was challenged by the Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus. He stated that the model of Ptolemy was a geocentric system where the Earth was at the center as the planets revolved around it was incorrect. Copernicus replaced the Earth with the Sun. This became a heliocentric system where the Sun was at the center as the planets moved around it. Copernicus' discovery was not yet published until Cardinal Nicholas von Schellenberg suggested that he should. Copernicus agreed, and his work entitled De Revolutionibus was published. Unfortunately, his work was critiqued by Giovanni Tolosani, a Dominican at the Holy Office at Rome, and then by the Congregation of the Index, who stated that Copernicus' work should not be read until correct.
In 1571, a German astronomer named Johannes Kepler was born. He once said, "Truth is the daughter of time, and I feel no shame in being her midwife." He was a very religious Lutheran and originally planned to become a priest. Although he ended up becoming an assistant to an astronomer named Tycho Brahe, his intellect brought envy to Brahe's eyes. Brahe suggested that all the planets except the Earth circled the Sun, and that the whole system circled the Earth. Brahe himself feared that his bright young assistant might overcome him as the head astronomer of his day, but after he died, Kepler had access to Brahe's data. Kepler eventually was the first to explain planetary motion. There were 3 laws which were a part of Kepler's theory. The first was, the orbits of the planets are elliptical, with the sun at one focus of this ellipse. This means that the sun isn't in the middle, but at one focus point. The distance between a planet and the sun constantly changes as it orbits. The next law depicts that the line joining the planets to the sun sweeps out in equal areas in equal times as the planet travels around the ellipse. Since the sun is at one focus point, there's two different areas called the perihelion, the point on an ellipse when the planet is close to the sun, and the aphelion, the point on an ellipse when the planet is farthest to the sun. This law states that when the planet is near the perihelion, it moves fast, and when it's near the aphelion, it moves slow. The last law implies that the period for a planet to orbit the sun increases rapidly with the radius of its orbit. This is the equation used to figure out the period of time it makes for a planet to orbit the sun.
In one of his essays, Galileo once wrote that, "In some years ago, I have discovered in the heavens many new things that I had not seen before my age." Following the invention of the telescope in 1609, Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei provided evidence that supports the heliocentric theory that Nicholas Copernicus first stated in 1543. Before the heliocentric theory, the image on the right, early Europeans depended on the Ptolemaic model first introduced by Ptolemy during the Hellenic era. According to one of his essays, Galileo discovers the moons of Jupiter and uses that self-contained solar system as a whole. Following the discovery of the moons, he also discovered that the sun has changing spots and the moon seem to have mountains. Despite being charged of heresy in 1633, Galileo's discoveries helped the development of modern understanding of movement of bodies. Galileo also formulated a new hypothesis which suggests that the bodies in motion will not stop unless some sort of resistance was introduced. He also developed a mathematical equation that would explain the movement of falling bodies. This series of terrestrial laws would later complement Kepler's laws of celestial motion.
The most dramatic moments in the development of science occurred in the discoveries of Galileo. In 1663, Roman Catholic officials were trying him for heresy. He was forced to admit that he made a mistake and had to take back his theories and observations. When he was leaving the courtroom, he said, "And yet it moves," Galileo was sentenced to life imprisonment, but later on was changed to house arrest. In 1609, Galileo had built a telescope to scrutinize the heavens more closely. In an essay, he stated that, "I discovered in the heavens many things that had not been seen in our age." Theologians and philosophers were livid at Galileo for putting into view of the world that seemed to oppose the Bible and the dogmas of the Church. He then supported himself by stating that the Bible itself was open to interpretation and by appealing directly to the Scripture and to St. Augustine's writings. Galileo had proclaimed in the soundness of his method that the physical problems we experience are not from the scriptural passages of the Bible, but from self-experience and demonstrations. For the Holy Bible and the phenomena of nature proceed alike from the divine word. But he says that he does not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended to forgo their use and by some other means to give us knowledge which we can attain by them.
I did many things in my time and is seen as one of the most influential people in the scientific revolution. I provided a new model of science for the next several centuries. Although I was well immersed in the scientific world, I still believe that the world was organized by a beneficent and wise God. You can find this statement in a book I wrote called Principia. As many of you know, in my 20s I developed a theory of gravity in which I discovered the force of gravity between two bodies was inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. Also, I recognized that planets move in the manner described by Kepler because they were drawn to the sun by a force that could not be calculated. I was an English physicist and mathematician who invented calculus. In my spare time, I worked on a unified theory attempting to unite Kepler and Galileo's law. I also practiced alchemy, which is basically the belief that base metals could be turned into gold. The model or picture I put out was that of the universe as a machine. The view of God as the creator who stood aside from his work and did not get involved directly with humanity was called deism. To myself, I am only a child playing on the beach while vast oceans of truth lie undiscovered before me. I am important to the scientific revolution because through my work I changed the way people look at things. As you already know, I invented calculus, a new model of science, and the theory of gravity. To During a time where scientific revolutions were capitalized, I contributed the most. Using the resources around me and the info from scientists before me, I was able to do a lot. Although I love science, I still believe in a beneficent God, which was quite odd for someone in my time. I tried not to displease anyone. How does one obtain knowledge? Well, you see, I like to think that to gain knowledge, one must experience and observe. The only way to be knowledgeable is to gather information, and only then can you make assumptions. Let me put it in this way. A wise man will make more opportunities than he finds. Essentially, this means the individual filled with knowledge has much experience from the opportunities he makes for himself. Along with experience, humans have the ability to reason. Through experience, knowledge is built up. Ultimately, laws can be formulated. Through my methods, there have been advances in science. In practicing my methods of observing then analyzing, we gain accurate information. To invent is to discover that we know, not to recover or resummon that which we already know.
John Locke was one of the many people who came up with the political theories after the Glorious Revolution, but his theories were thought to be the most important. He thought as a rational person would. He did not ignore history and customs like Thomas Hobbes did. He believed that humans will eventually start fighting, so they needed a higher power to stop that from happening. Although he believed that the people had a right to rebel if, quote, the sovereignty broke the contract made with the people, end quote, John Locke was a key factor, among other philosophers, poets, and etc., in forming constitutions in the Western world like the United States of America. If these people hadn't stood up for what they believed in, then constitutions would never have been formed, and countries were at the risk of being at the mercy of a harsh monarchy/dictatorship. Both John Locke and Thomas wanted peace and order, but was determined to prove that authority had its limits. Quote, freedom of men under government is to have a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society, and made by legislative power erected in it, end quote. John Locke. John Locke says that freedom for human beings under government authority should be a right and everyone should be included in it. He also says that the right should be appointed and supported by the legislation. Support for this law by legislation will show the people that care about the people, and in turn will get the support back from them. This revolution was a step closer in separating religion and politics. It made people realize that God did not appoint certain leaders to rule over a country, but it should be governed by the few chosen by the many. It allowed for more fair laws for common people because the focus was shifted onto making the country better for everyone and not just the crown and nobles.
René Descartes was a Frenchman who developed a new understanding on human knowledge. He believed that human beings are thinkers with reason. He explained that if something were to be true, it had to be proven. Like in his statement, Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, the evidence of thought proves the hypothesis of existence. Descartes had a strong belief in mathematical reason as a path to knowledge. Since he did believe in proving something with evidence, and mathematical proofs were filled with many ways to show evidence. Before the science revolution, inductive reasoning was a method for discoveries that was developed by Aristotle. One had to reach a conclusion or theory by getting facts from individual cases. Descartes' method of deductive reasoning had to do with developing a hypothesis, then looking for evidence to prove that hypothesis. In this era of the science revolution, people were just starting to develop their interpretations of it. Descartes' method was helpful during the science revolution, since scientists have been using Descartes' method of rationalism and deductive thinking to advance knowledge. His understanding of human knowledge helped people solve things without having to go back into reading it about the past. It helped them to think on their own and prove things by themselves by using their minds and showing evidence. He had confidence that people had the ability to use their minds to come to conclusions if the right methods were used. In the words of René Descartes, it is not enough to have a good mind, the main thing is to use it well.